Well, yeah.
Why don't we get going, and people may join us as we go along.
Yeah, sure. So hey guys, welcome to the Ubuntu Impact Venture Studio workshop. Great to see everybody on the call today. I'll just do a quick intro. I think we're all pretty familiar with how this process works, but of course on the call we have Dan Gordon, the founder and board chair of Colleaga, and Lance Malherber, our Ubuntu Studio lead. Just quick reminders, it is an interactive session, so everybody please do leave your videos on throughout. Just remember to leave yourselves on mute just to reduce any background noise. If you have any trouble during the call today, you can reach out to Michiko in the chat or any one of our innovation Sherpas, and then they'll help you out as best they can. So we're looking at about a 90-minute session today. We'll see how it goes. During the first half of the session, we'll give you an overview of what we've accomplished in the studio to date. And then Lance will walk us through the initial strategic approach that he's been working on. In the latter half, we'll be going up into breakout rooms to critically examine the strategic approach and have a bit of a chat. So before we get started, I'm going to ask that everyone could quickly log on to their community accounts. Michiko will share a link to the community webpage in the chat. So for those of you who might be joining us for the first time today, this is our central hub for our venture studio. So it's where we facilitate collaboration amongst venture participants. Specifically, that happens, as many of us know, in the Ubuntu community circle. So feel free, everybody, to go ahead and open that up. As you can see, the first post that I've made here is actually the presentation that Lance will be giving us today. So it's the business case and reference architecture assumptions. What I would suggest, because unfortunately a lot of people were unable to join us today, that is if you have any comments or questions during Lance's presentation, write them in the comments section just below the post. So that way it's a way for us to kind of keep track of the questions as they might be coming in during the presentation. And two, the people who weren't able to join us today can kind of get a sense of the conversations that we were having. So in our session today, we are going to be posting a lot of what we're doing back into the circle. Again, just to catch people up and keep them abreast of what's been going on today. So if you have any trouble logging on or if you've forgotten any passwords, again, reach out to Michiko or the Innovation Sherpas. You can choose to screen share if you want, but you can also just leave it open in the background. And yeah, please write some notes and then we'll get to them later on in the call. So with that being said, I think we've all done the introductions in our activator space, so we won't go into that. Yeah, I think that's all. So with that being said, I will now pass it off to Dan. Oh, Dan, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Katie, and good morning and welcome everybody. In the spirit of how this has all been happening, I'm going to make a couple of comments and then actually open it up to our group to suggest how we'll work today. We've seen this before, that this is what Colleaga was set up to do. Is to foster collaborative investment and network innovation. We're really what we do is we connect together public, academic, and industrial innovators to collaborate on complex, difficult social problems. And but most importantly, we bring together activators, people like us on the call today who really believe that we can create transformative change by acting together. And I'd like to remind everybody that it was only about 4 months ago, sometime in end of November, December last year, in the middle of the pandemic, that we said, let's do an Ubuntu Impact Venture Studio. And this is what we set out to do. We said, look, there are significant psychosocial problems in South Africa. We think that we can make a difference. Let's produce a set of public-private innovations, ventures that are going to improve access, delivery, and resilience of mental health, and at the same time generate new economic opportunities for all people in South Africa. That was just 4 months ago. Since then, we have had, this is the third meeting of this group, and we've had quite a number of meetings between the participants in the venture, and several participants on the call. And so the first thing I'd like to say is thank you. Lance, Cassie, Tony, you guys have been fantastic. This is what building connected innovation looks like. It is people like us who say, you know what, we're committed and we're going to make it happen. And while we may not be able to see the end point very clearly, we know that this is something really important, and we can see how it speaks to us personally and to our organizations and what we all want to do together. Secondly, for everybody else on the call, George, you've been a great supporter of this project for many years. Billy, you've given us your time, your energy. Tony, Jay, thank you very much. It is so important to these kinds of ventures that everybody continues to connect, because that's the only way that they keep going. I will say that there were a number of different people who also wanted to join this call, and I see that Osama is joining us from Dubai. That's great. Welcome, Osama. We'll tell you a little bit about the start of the Dubai studio and what we're seeing there in a few minutes. But thank you all. There were a number of other people who have expressed interest in this project. Dr. Jason Bankies, who thought he could join today, Dr. Dan Steyn from the University of Cape Town, all of the NextJ Health, the Jambi folks. For one and a number of reasons, people couldn't be on the call today, perhaps also reflective of, firstly, short weeks in South Africa and many other priorities, but also that people are kind of zoomed out, and asking for an hour and a half is that's a big ask of people when there are so many other competing priorities. So again, thank you very much for joining. We really want to make sure that this is an extremely useful time, and thank you for your commitment to really making sure that we can realize this shared purpose among us. And if you go to the next slide, that translates into a set of very tangible deliverables. What we want to do is we want to find 5 different ventures. You will hear from Lance today how that is moving forward. We want to get at least 3 of those funded so that we can move forward, and what we want to do is impact 5 million people. You will see that the population groups allow us to do that. That is where we want to go. That is how that shared purpose vision becomes reality. So with that, I'd like to suggest that we had planned several breakout groups. I suggest that we just, Lance, let's go through your slides and let's spend a little more time on the discussion among the whole group. And let's see if we want to use breakout groups at the time.
Perfect, Dan.
Lance, over to you.
So let me share my screen. Can you folks see this very colorful slide deck with the funnel?
I can.
Okay, so I think as a kickoff, just taking a step back on where we started, and I think, Dan, you reached out to me somewhere in July, August last year. September, we had the first conversation with the Colleaga team, and our first formal event was somewhere early December. And for folks that have not been involved in projects driven by Colleaga, it could be very confusing because this is non-classical projects. So although there is a defined start date and a start to the project, we have an ambition to resolve a challenge. And in this case, as Dan aptly put it, the challenge was to impact people's lives in South Africa. And as we started off orientating ourselves by illustration on this slide, we grew the conversation, identifying initially the need to focus on PTSD in first responders and veterans. That gradually and very fast grew into a wider segment of folks inflicted by mental health challenges. And as the conversation grew, we discovered a lot more in terms of refining our understanding about the problem case. And along came Casey Chambers and Zane Wilson from SADC, South Africa Anxiety Depression Group. And that really refined our understanding about what really is happening here in South Africa in addressing those challenges. And really where we are at this point in time is driving through co-creating a value statement and a business case as we move forward to telling a story in our business case and pitching that for investors that could potentially fund this operation in South Africa. We were very glad about Osama Al-Hussein, all the way from Dubai, of the Department of Dubai Health Authority, both regulator and a provider of health services in that region, whom also showed an interest, and the collaboration is extended to that part of the world as well. So as we drive forward with initiatives in South Africa, our ambition is also to collaborate in other parts of the world with what we are doing and learning in this part of the in the globe. So just get this going to the next slide. So really, as I mentioned, in December 10th, we kicked off. We introduced the concept to a number of key stakeholders and participants. And Katie, you would remember, we originally started off with 8 folks responding from 8 different companies. And we were really astounded that we had well over 30 companies participating in that first kickoff, which really showed the extent of interest in what we're doing. And from that early session, we developed a shared purpose, and that was to impact the lives of South Africans afflicted by mental health care challenges. But also what came out from that was also remote patient care was also of interest. And in addition to that, another field for us was to not only focus on the patient, as you will see later on as we talk about the segments of the patients that we've defined, but also the family circle of care. That was important. So, and I think during later calls with Osama from Dubai, that became prevalent for them as well, that the practitioners in their part of the world focused not only on the patients, but also the family circle of care, and more so the parents of those patients. So from that early session, we defined, started developing our project groups, and agreed on a flight plan for milestones heading into 2021. Although I just have the 3 dates here, as Dan also mentioned, many other sessions, almost on a weekly basis, happened between the core group here in South Africa and the Sherpas guiding us through collaborative thinking, design thinking, and building our use cases and assumptions. And maybe, ironically, because we were, most of us that participated from South Africa being technologists, we focused primarily in the beginning on technology, and rapidly as the conversation evolved, we realized that the essence was about forming the use cases. So we've refined our ventures. It started out with 1, grew to 6, and we've, in the classical design thinking principle, that all got turned on its head, and where we have a use case assumption around the corporates, whom then will pre-select based on their particular needs in the field, what segments they are after. We've developed the early stage reference architecture that I'm not going to spend too much time on today, but we'll spend more time on the assumptions that we're making around the use cases and the business cases. And I think essentially for us now, as we move into the April period and developing our business case, is we want to test these assumptions that we've made with this audience. And as Katie has also mentioned early on, we have posted all of this information on the Colleaga platform, and you are invited to, if not during this session, to afterwards go and place your comments on the Colleaga platform and test our assumptions, what we're making. So onto the next slide. the studio really here in South Africa set out to build a venture based on one of the commonalities that we found across all the segments that we identified, ranging from students through to corporate retail customers. The generic attribute that came out was the need to build a digital enablement platform. And this has also evolved. So we have an in-state digital platform that is state-of-the-art thinking and really covers a whole range of functional, architectural, technology architectural and business architectural attributes, and would be able to address to a greater extent all of this, or lesser extent individual components of this. So ranging from virtual mental health care, step care support model. So the step care model really was, Casey, I think in your experience in SADC, which appealed to us in building into our venture studio, that we've not increased the scope of our efforts into the professional clinician space, but really to act as a first port of call and triage to the point where we can have referrals back to the professionals. And your statistics that your organization is doing is, and especially that the increase of the calls that you receive on a monthly basis during COVID really illustrates and confirms to us that we're on the right path. Chronic disease management, we also spoke of, other than just mental health care, and especially focused on cancer, HIV, would also be an area that we would be interested in covering. From a technology perspective, multi-channel engagement platforms, so not just telephony, but also push and pull of technologies, and making sure that patients can reach the digital platform either through phone calls, through WhatsApp messaging, but also be served with information on self-help services and group collective support to define groups in the segments that we've identified. Because of the data security element in South Africa, especially the PAPIA Act and many other standards required for individual patient records, but also privacy, it is essential for us from the onset that we have built in a secure digital health enabling platform architecture, and that the further assumption that we're making of this digital platform is that it would be a collaborative impact innovation as a service, so cloud-based, and then later on, as we evolve the business model, hybrid cloud with brick and mortar front ends. And Casey, we can talk about the use case that you are busy building with containers in some of the rural areas or the townships in South Africa to reach those vulnerable patients. So essentially what we've defined, and this group has expanded and contracted, are students. We're making this assumption based on the reason that Professor Jason Bankies from Stellenbosch University and his peers have just recently completed amongst 26 universities in South Africa, with a student population, a group participating in this research of over 1 million students, that clearly students with underlying mental health conditions is a segment that corporates might be interested in. And that assumption is based not on, again, classical project funding or technology project funding, but our base assumption, as you'll see later on when I cover the business case assumptions, is that corporates would feel the need for either providing funding for initiatives like this, reaching that target audience from their marketing budgets or from their social responsibility budgets. I think, Osama, during the conversation that we had with one of your specialists in the primary healthcare sector out in Dubai, resonated with us, with struggling parents, and these are not necessarily parents struggling with financial conditions, but parents in general that are in today's world of remote and distributed working, don't have the wherewithal to understand what it is to deal with youngsters at home, struggling with parenthood, the questions around that, but also potentially if they have an affected child in their household, how do they go about dealing with those issues? And that really came back to resonated with the focus that we wanted to drive through here in South Africa around the circle of care around the patient. I spoke about the other group about patients with chronic disease and their families again. And corporate employers was another segment, again, when we tested that with groups across the globe. We all live and work, and as Dan also mentioned, we zoomed out, we teamed out, we Skyped out, and the prevalence of increased mental health care conditions with corporate employers at home is an area that we believe is also potentially a segment that the corporate customers would want to target with mental health care support services. And then in our collaborative, as we expanded our conversation with our network here in South Africa, an interest was expressed with some of our facilitators in doing introductions in especially the telecommunications space and the large banking sector, to extend this service as a branding opportunity, really, to their front-end customers. So if you think about a Vodacom, or which is part of the Vodafone operations out of Europe, and MTN, which is another big telecommunication provider, they sit collectively probably here in South Africa and Southern Africa with a population group of retail customers in the order of probably 45 to 55 million customers, who are all connected, and would be an excellent opportunity for corporate customers to provide a discrete service to those customers. Again, in the retail customer space, another assumptions we're making is that some of these retail customers have possibly not received the type of support from the organizations that support them. One of the recent cases in the banking fraternity in South Africa, a big retail bank, in Q4 last year has lost 200,000 retail customers. And that is assumption for us is to approach that organization and provide this customer retention strategy to disgruntled retail customers by providing a branded opportunity like this in supporting those customers with something a lot more personalized. The next set of slides we have really is around the assumptions that we're making, and we've earlier on in the week, as an internal group, we've ranked the segments of the vulnerable patients in a ranking order. And maybe, Dan, this would be an opportunity for us to maybe just stop here, and with all the assumptions I've already put on the table, test what the audience are saying about our assumptions. So maybe we do that. Let's start by, so these are our assumptions. We're saying it's students with mental health conditions, and we can give you more data around that. Corporate employees who are remote workers, patients with chronic disease and their families, struggling parents, and corporate retail customers. Are there maybe some of these groups that we are missing? Shall we open the floor here?
Yes, I think so. So as opposed to breaking out in groups, I think let's just have a group conversation, please. What you'll see is there's a series of questions around, and really that's what we're doing at the moment, is validating our assumptions. The first one is around who are the populations, do they make sense? And then from the population perspective, the second set of use case assumptions are who would our potential customer, who is a corporate entity, value? And then the set of assumptions around business assumptions. Just to reinforce the point that Lance is making, if you look at students, firstly, what Dr. Banke has pointed out to us is that a third of South African students have reported a mental health problem in the last 12 months, mostly generalized anxiety, depression, and substance use. Of those students, as Lance also pointed out, half of them came into being a student with an underlying mental health condition because of childhood maltreatment. the predominant majority are female students and students with atypical sexual orientation, gay students. And also early onset mental health conditions that are not treated can result in lifelong trauma and lifelong struggles with depression and anxiety and substances. He also points out that suicide is the second leading cause of death among students. And in the last 12 months, almost a quarter of students, thought about and planned a suicide attempt, and 4% actually tried. And I think the nub for us is that when we spoke to the people who are leading the student mental health in South Africa, the universities are not delivering nearly enough of the capacity, simply because they can't afford it. There are student mental health groups. They are run by professional counselors. They are treating, they do one-on-one treatments. There isn't a platform, a step care approach for South Africa. So all of those students that we're talking about are not getting the treatment that they need in order to both treat them now and avoid lifelong difficulties. And the evidence is shown is that if you do treatments, you can cut suicide rates by 75%. Not only that, but the treatment of mental health conditions with a step care model are highly effective. So that is really sort of the nub of all of these groups. There isn't a direct group that will provide the care for the treatment. The real point of the studio is what is the alternative business model, and Lance with others have said, look, what we need is a platform kind of a business model where the recipients of the service do not pay for it, but others pay for the service because of the value they get from it. So that is really what we want to test with you today, starting off with this first question of what do you think of these as our target groups?
Dan, can I maybe just add to that? Early this morning, in updating myself on what's happening in the world on news, like most of us would do, there was a very interesting article posted in the Financial Times here in South Africa, and it was based on recent research that was conducted around the Generation Z economy. So that's the population group from 8 to 24, and astounding, last year that population group generated 131 billion rand of revenue. So if you think about whether that segment of the population vulnerable group is financially viable, there's your answer. Interesting in that research data is that organizations that fared very well in providing a service to those to that particular segment, and you can arguably say that the high net worth population of Generation Z are the students whom are all connected, probably have a bank account, and are about to enter the economy, the formal economy. Of that population group, it's astounding to see that the telecommunication companies, especially Vodacom, is a leading brand by preference to these youngsters, purely because they did something different. They provided data for free during the peak times of COVID. They provided discounted pricing to students and that population group. The organizations that did the worst were the traditional banks that just carried on as if it was business as usual. The traditional retail organizations that carried on as if nothing has changed. So our assumption that we're making is that this could be a primary target audience for organizations such as the telecommunication groups, whether it's the classical banks that want to retain that market segment, or new banks in South Africa such as Capitec that are doing astoundingly well and really growing in market share, that do want to use an opportunity like this for branding, for market growth, into a sector that are connected, have a bank account, and they are willing to fund some of the social responsibility investment into that segment. But those are some of our assumptions. Let's see what the floor is to say about what we what I'm thinking.
Perhaps Billy, would you mind kicking us off, and then George, then Jay, and followed by Cassie or Sama? Billy, over to you.
Mute, Billy.
Hello. Hello?
Yeah, hello. My screen
Can you hear me?
is telling me that I'm muted, so my wife actually loves that screen. So I think probably one of the most critical components, which we actually had an interesting meeting about yesterday, Lance, and probably not an assumption, but a crucial component to build into the narrative as I look at your funnel, would be the whole notion of the security, and I would say the vitality of our environment to deal with security of people's privacy, people's current disposition and current positioning. So I would, I wouldn't say that's an assumption. I personally would say that should be, if I can add to the things that you've suggested, I would think we should actually start agreeing with one another what are the principles that we're going to subscribe to as we roll this out. And make sure that our principles can become statements of truth with basically no lifespan built into them. And if we therefore can't agree as a group on a principle, I'm therefore then in practice quite happy to say that we should build an additional set of assumptions. But therefore, I would sort of kick this off, Lance and Dan, to say that I think we should be very clear about our principle on dealing with, and I mean, it's a standard thing, and I know it's motherhood and apple pie for the Canadians on the call. I understand that, but I think it's very important that we capture the principle of privacy, personal recognition, personal decomposition, and be sure that we treat that with the utmost respect that it expects from us. So that would be one of my comments. And then the second one would be that I'm personally, I've spent the last couple of weeks throughout South Africa, and I personally became fairly aware of multi-tiered or multi-layered technology positioning. So I also became very aware that in South Africa, we're very reliant on companies like Vodacom. But I mean, if the mobile organization, if mobility fails you, as a human being, you struggle to get around. The minute when your mobility is hampered by the inability of a mobile provider to provide you the service, then that can have an impact. So what I'm basically saying, back onto the drawing board, it's great to talk about apps and it's great to talk about applying technology. But over the last couple of weeks, I've just realized that whilst I was trying to get a Wi-Fi connected into my house, I felt like, well, I was cut off just under my throat. I mean, it was like, what am I doing? I start my laptop and I've got no connection, and then you buy 2 gigs of data, and within 10 minutes you've got nothing left. And then you get an app from Lance. You are not responding. Well, yes, Lance, I know, because I've got no infrastructure to respond. So I mean, we're talking about Zoom fatigue, but I honestly felt the last 2 weeks that there is another fatigue that sets in, and that is the fatigue of not being connected. And I can understand that, if my kids were still younger and they had.
Billy, I think we lost you there, and that's probably the technology fatigue that kicked in.
So perhaps for sort of another perspective on the going back to the use cases, Cassie, what are your thoughts around the ordering of the populations by need?
So thanks so much for that, Dan, and thanks again, Lance, just for that really great overview. And I also just have to thank everyone that's engaged with us, is because I've really enjoyed the conversation and people sharing their expertise. It's definitely broadened my mind to a totally new level. And I think exactly what you mentioned now, Dan, with regards to the assumptions and the ranking, which is something I've even tested out within our team over the last day since we last spoke. And you know, wearing the mental health NGO hat, where we say, well, every target audience is the most important. But where we see the biggest intake, and just from monitoring our calls from the last kind of 11 months, we've received 500,000 phone calls to our helplines. Over 100,000 of those were suicide-related helpline calls. And our target audience are between the ages of 18 and 30, so our young adults and that young generation. So yes, I would have to say students would be, if I have to rank at the top there. But it'd be interesting to hear from others where they would rank it. And I think whoever you're speaking to might change that around, and especially whichever time of the year that we're talking through this ranking. So yes, for me, students, young people is really important. And when we're looking at, in South Africa also specifically, that our most at-risk age group for suicide is our adolescents, so our teenagers. So they're starting young, and that's just, you know, overflows to other age groups, and it has a huge knock-on effect. Then having to look at corporates, you know, that also then also covers parents as well, who are looking after families and children. So yes, I think the ranking at the moment is good, and it's hard because I'd like to fit everyone as number one. But I'd love to open it to the floor and see what others would say, and if they would move anything around and why.
George?
So I've been looking at that as well, and Cassie, I think you were on to the only question I had when I looked at this was, if students with underlying conditions, or perhaps even just students in general, are the number one target, then wouldn't parents be a close number two? And I think you see that maybe in addictions as well, like that connection is there, and siblings of those students, I think, are also impacted. So I don't know if that's all one package, but you know, it's a little out of my field. I don't know too much about the research here, but those connections seem to be there for me. And what little I do know, there's, you know, where there's someone affected, then there's someone connected who's also affected.
Someone.
George, if I can maybe just ask, or just refer to a conversation that we had with Osama and the medical health practitioner out there in Dubai recently, when we went through a similar exercise. Osama, you would recall what the doctor mentioned on the day was, and I think, Dan, you asked the question, what would be the one target audience that you would prioritize as the first? And the doctor suggested parents. So parents resonates with us because it's the family circle of care that incorporates the students, the children, but they also cover the corporate sector, whether they are a retail customer or employers. So that was interesting. Maybe Osama, you want to weigh in on what we discussed that day?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So I was really happy to have the conversation last time with our expert from DHA, which is specialized in mental health. I believe that we agreed all that. Just give me 1 second.
Osama, you went on mute again. I think you've got similar challenges.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that the discussion was really grateful with to highlight the top use cases that we need, and as you mentioned that having parents within the ecosystem of this application will be really beneficial. What I can add also, that we need also to build our architecture in a way that accommodates the different social settings between countries. And I think these are more related to content. So maybe to have a way that we can have different content, different messages, handling the same issue or the same disease or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So having it in a way that's flexible from the architecture will help us very much to localize the solution. Well, this is what I mean. So maybe as a suggestion, I believe that maybe we can think of having some sort of an open air framework, so kind of a clinical modeling approach that can allow us to re-implement it in different languages and different country settings. So I think this would be a good idea to start with.
Thank you. Jay, giving us a Canadian telehealth perspective, what's your view on the target audience being young adults from about 15 to 35, which incorporates a number of these subgroups?
Thanks, Dan. I am really not qualified to rank order any of these. I would like to say that up front. I don't know enough about the landscape or the demographics or the statistics. I do know from a sort of a theoretical perspective, or perhaps even more tangible than theoretical, that a great point of leverage on some of these social problems are through women and children first. So giving any initiative that targets women and children tends to have a multiplier effect throughout the entire family unit and sort of beyond that. I am a little bit, I'm wondering whether you need to maybe back up a little bit. Making the assumptions is fairly easy. The real proof in the pudding is sort of asking yourself, what has to hold in the real world for that assumption to be true? For example, for your number one students with underlying mental health conditions, no doubt. Sorry, I'm getting a echo back. The population epidemiology supports that probably across the world, that younger people are struggling. But to sort of go beyond that and invest your precious resources, you have to ask some other hard questions like, well, if we were to target them, would they avail themselves of the service willingly? Who else is out there that's already offering that? There's so many virtual services that have come online. So I really am hesitant to sort of order these. I would encourage you, though, to keep seeking out people who are on the ground, who are dealing with these things. They're the really credible people, people like Cassie, what she just said, and just continue to pull them and get a feeling for what's happening out there. And then you'll kind of know, it will emerge organically. You'll know what to do. At some point, you do have to sort of, you can't just stay at the edge of the pool dipping your toe in the water. You got to dive in. And I know it can be done. I've seen it done during my career. I was part of a group in the early 2000s, probably the best project of my career. It was a group that was seeking to offer services over the World Wide Web to patients who are at the end of life. And for that time, that was really pioneering, and it was pretty scary because you're dealing with a very vulnerable population. And to Willie's comment earlier about making sure that you're bulletproof with respect to security and privacy. In any case, I would reference this project as an example that it can be done. It took many, many years and a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people, but this group was one of the first in Canada, and to my knowledge, the first in North America, to actually go beyond presenting static content on a website to actually interacting with people. So they went on. Their name is the Canadian Virtual Hospice. The guy who was really the champion of that was a psychiatrist here in Canada, Dr. Harvey Max Chachanov in Western Canada. So I hope that's helpful. Again, I'm not in any position though to make any comments on who has the greatest need.
Thank you, Jay. George, before we bring you in, Lance, I wonder if we should move on to, given time, onto questions around, which I think are the critical ones, taking Jay's point around, yeah, we need to be extremely aware that we can offer the service, but we need to make sure that it gets adopted. Perhaps let's move into a discussion about the business case and the idea of going to corporates to fund it and what we want to find out there.
Yes, absolutely, Dan. As we evolved our conversation, and Jay, to your point, the more we reach out and broaden our conversation to a wider audience of especially the SADCs, the cases of the world that are practitioners, that know what is statistically and practically the prevalence of healthcare conditions in the different stages of severity, the more we understand, and it's we've had a couple of goosebump moments, Dan and I, that has been very close to this conversation with Cassie as well, and not necessarily just what we discovered here in South Africa going through that funnel model, but also when we shared our assumptions and thinking with Osama and the health practitioners out in the UAE, that we are nearing a target audience that are vulnerable. And in a recent discussion with especially Professor Jason Banki's, one of the assumptions that we thought was an accurate assumption was that universities, as the primary agents for providing education to student groups, would participate. That was very soon a no-show, simply because of the potential legal ramifications of providing incorrect advice to the students, and which might expose them legally. So again, if you look at the research data points, the use case is there. The students, and I'm just referring to students, it could be very much applied to any of the other segments that we have. We eventually switched from the target population groups to whom will be potential buyers. So the assumptions we're making here, as you can see on the business case assumptions, is that we believe that corporate South Africa, in many respects, would be a potential buyer for the service. In this model, we see that students, for instance, and assumptions we're making is that, and back to Willy's example of his experience recently with a telecommunications company, as a very minimum, folks that are connected by a mobile telephone, that have data loaded on that phone, that are connected on the internet to receive both the opportunity to dial into services such as what SADC is providing. And our ambition is also to modernize their infrastructure to provide a more robust online experience to their callers and the segments that the corporate customers will be interested in. And as we mentioned earlier, the assumption we're making is corporates have funds available for social responsibility impact initiatives. And that would be a prime target for us to go after those funds. And the Vodacoms, the reference case that I just mentioned this morning, the 131 billion rand of budget spent annually by the young youth of South Africa. That clearly is a vast population group that the corporates would be after, to get connectivity to them, to brand, whether it is a cell phone contract, whether it is a bank account, or just merely a social responsibility initiative to say, this is our attempt to support your needs in mental health care. So that is just, and I'm not going to read through all of those statements. These are some of the assumptions we're making as the corporate South Africa being the primary audience that we will approach in selling this offering to, whilst the student population, and for instance, or for that matter, all the other populations that we've got segmented as beneficiaries of this service, will get this as a zero-rated service back to them.
So just opening it up, and just as we do that, Dr. Jason Bankies has joined us on the call. Welcome, Dr. Bankies from Stellenbosch University. Jason, we were just describing a result in the last 15 or 20 minutes to the rest of the group to talk about the importance of providing a stepped care mental health model to students, parents, and sort of generalize that to the population of young adults from the ages of 15 to 35. Speaking specifically to the business case assumptions, then, and perhaps George, can we start with you? Really, what we wanted to hone in is from a lean startup perspective, what is the key business assumption that we need to go and test?
Sorry, I had to come off mute there for a second. So yeah, I was really happy to see it get to this point because so a lot of the things that were said earlier, are sensible things. I like that you separated the user and the customer or buyer, right? So that's I think going to be really important here. Engaging corporations, certainly legitimate. I've seen it work before. I've also seen, we've got in Canada, right, the Bell Canada Let's Talk. So you're looking for the philanthropic or altruistic angle. So yeah, it's definitely a thing. Doing this kind of thing electronically is definitely possible. I just finished working with through Springboard Enterprises with an organization called George, G-H-E-O-R-G. It's targeted at a younger audience, and they have a mobile app that helps children with childhood anxiety issues, and it actually provides treatment through the mobile app. So definitely, these things are all real and possible, and there's an element of self-care in that one that we didn't talk about. So that's all really good stuff. But to Jay's point, I think as well, it's time to kind of get out of the building, right? So from a lean startup approach, I see these business case assumptions here. That's outstanding because now I can model the business. So I'm envisioning these, Dan, on a canvas, right? Or trying as best as I can. So dropping them out there, figuring out where the risks are. And there's a certain amount of risk in each of these assumptions, but some are riskier than others. I would start asking questions like, well, where's the research that supports, some of the more clinical assumptions that we have. But from these, you could, I think, in a very straightforward way, develop falsifiable hypotheses that you could then get out and test, right? So, you have some assumptions there about corporations using corporate responsibility budgets. There it is, it's the number 7. Absolutely true. I used to be involved with things like that, and we definitely did. But I can tell you as well, there's a lot of people looking for that funding, right? So where's the hook? So getting out and testing those, turning them into falsifiable hypotheses, running experiments, which in this case is probably just talking to people, right? Getting out there and surveying, trying not to lead them when you do, and then inspecting and adapting. I think I think that this gets you started for sure. So from a lean startup perspective, it is good. You have a real important problem, which is the most important thing. You have some hypothesis on your solution to that problem, and you have, I think, pretty strong data on who has that problem. You're still working out who buys the answer to that problem. That might be, when you put it all on the page, that might be your riskiest assumption. I think you have to do it first, though, to make sure. And then you've got self-awareness on this slide, right? So to me, that's really encouraging because I don't normally see that after 2 or 3 meetings. It's usually that we'll build this thing and then a shrug of the shoulders and then success out the other end, or profit, or whatever we're looking for. So it's nice to see that there's some grounding here. But so here, like, you made a bunch of pretty bold assumptions. Let's get out and see whether those are how they play out in the real world. I think that's where I'd go.
Great. Jason, thank you for joining us. I wonder, we talked about your clinical results, saying there definitely is a target population. They're not getting the services that they need. I don't know, but what is your sort of general experience or your feeling about whether corporate South Africa would value this service enough to want to fund it?
Dan, that's a very good question, Colleague. Sorry, I was joined this meeting late. I was unavoidably held up, but I'm glad to be here now. You know, there's a lot of money that corporations are putting into education, and I don't think it's a big leap to say that to get a return on your investment on education, you've got to look after mental health. That mental health is a risk factor for academic failure, for academic dropout, and there is evidence, you know, some evidence to show that people are putting money into education. So I don't think it's a stretch to build on that. Dan, have I answered your question?
It's a great point that actually what I would take away from that is tailor the message to the audience. If a corporation says we give money for education, then make it about academic failure. If a corporation says we give money to create a market, then make it about customer development. If the corporation says we are funding something else, understand what the corporation is about. Don't sort of say we've got a hammer and there's only one kind of nail.
Yeah, and we certainly have the data, you know, to support that among first-year students, that you can reduce academic failure by up to 22% by treating mental disorders in that population. That's a significant reduction. But I think that, you know, the state must also have an interest in keeping kids in school. And obviously they don't have deep pockets.
Yes, so on that note, our assumption is that there isn't going to be public money for this, and that is why we need to develop a financial model where a customer pays for the service and impact investors finance the project to get a return on the capital.
Absolutely, yes.
Opening it up again, Jay?
Dan, if I may, just one example where this actually has worked recently here in Canada was, I believe there's a consortium of 5 of the biggest firms in Canada, among them Air Canada, Loblaws, the others escape me at this point, but they didn't see themselves in the business of employee health until the pandemic came along and really hurt their business badly. So Air Canada being one example among that group who's really suffered. As a consequence, they were compelled to get in the game whether they wanted to or not. And there's been a lot of controversy around rapid point of care testing. But in the end, what happened was, the last I had heard through the media, admittedly, was that these corporations had embraced rapid point of care testing. They are squarely going to get in the business of testing employees so that they can get back in the game. I think there was some frustration with governments across Canada because there was a point of care testing was languishing. The science is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it's still an emerging technology, but it was good enough for these guys to offer to their employees. So that assumes their willingness to build infrastructure and to resource that and to get behind it so that they can start to get back in the black and earn a profit. So if the right conditions are there, this can be done. So going back to what George had said, by way of reality testing, can you sort of cast about and look for examples of that happening on the ground in South Africa? Are there any corporations who've actually stepped up and have actually got in the business of supporting employee health? What was it they did that allowed them to, or what were the drivers for that to happen? So if you start to sort of look around, I'm sure they're out there somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think perhaps the question for us is we've thought about businesses that perhaps have not been as impacted during the pandemic, like banks or like telcos, that probably better. But which are the industries in South Africa where employers have been significantly adversely affected, have large employee bases, and would see this as a way of getting back into the game? Willie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, the thought that sort of jumped to mind was there needs to be, well, maybe part of what we need to establish, and I remember in the session that I had with Casey and her lovely ladies a couple of weeks ago, we did discuss that the perpetuality of urgency and therefore the need of certain services needs to be made clear in the boardroom, and maybe for a lack of a better term, we need to turn boardrooms into maker rooms. So I think the pandemic is, like Jay quite clearly indicated, also in South Africa, the pandemic has all of a sudden opened up a brand new set of business requirements that we've never really considered. We never considered that security, for argument's sake, just as for instance, that security is not only the access control into my building, but it's actually the control of everybody that's got access to the data or the content of my organization. So that has changed the whole role within security. And I think to the same, this morning I was on a call with a group of people where the opening 30 minutes of a 45-minute call was really to find out how's your mother and how's your father. It was really figuring out, you know, how well are people at that moment as they are participating and as we expect some critical input from them. Again, it's changed the phenomena as to how we operate. So I'm very a staunch believer also in what Jay has said, but I really believe that we should use the pandemic in a very positive way and indicate to boardrooms that they need to recognize the need. And therefore they need to also put some serious amount of investment where they invest now in technology. They should start investing in people, and technology investment is just going to follow. So I think it's definitely going to require a new way of thinking, and also a younger generation that thinks about these things different than the old school. Well, let's figure out how much money we can get rather than how much well-being can we create. So that would be my 5 cents on that one.
Willie, if I can just tag on to that. A lot of the research data points that are coming through, and Jason can talk to this, but certainly what we picked up in the media in the last 2-3 months has been a swing away from classical, the opportunity for classical business models to be disrupted. I think, Casey, in one of the conversations that we've had with you, and I don't want to knock any brands in South Africa, but certainly the big administrators, their ambivalence to support mental health for their patients, which is subdued in many respects. So they don't emphasize the described benefits that patients have to leverage of the insurance that they have to make use of this. And Casey's front-end staff that work on a daily basis with these patients constantly have to direct the folks to what prescribed benefits they have. So are we going to target that particular administrator group? Probably not initially, but will this initiative of ours, if it takes off, have a disruptive effect on administrators to eventually also participate in providing a much needed service to any one of the target audiences, target patient groups? We believe so. But as an initial group, not a primary target audience for us, but could be a disruptor for them in exactly what Willie is saying. In the boardrooms, you have to consider a different business model and a different engagement model with your consumers and the stakeholder group in that consumer audience. During the weekend at a social event, I spoke about our initiative to executives who own a very large distribution group in the retail space, and they do nothing in support of wellness in the broader context for their employers. And when I spoke about this model, their interest is not only to participate in this model for their own employers, but also the distributed value chain of customers that they serve and also supply groups that they serve. So I think we absolutely take the point, both Jay and George. It's the point that we've got to take all these hypotheses and go out into the market and now test and sell it.
Cassie, could you tell us a little bit more about, you run helplines, 24/7 mental health helplines staffed by volunteers. Can you give us a sense of, beyond the specific lines that you've sort of run traditionally, in the last sort of year or more, who's reaching out to you and saying, we need a greater level of support? What drove the increasing numbers?
Yeah, so with regards to our numbers, I mean, the data that we have on a monthly basis, we're getting, you know, at the moment over 40,000 calls each month. The majority of our callers are from females, either for themselves, because women have better help-seeking behavior than men. However, more of our suicide calls are actually from men, and often when we're dealing with a male caller, they're more severe. When we're looking at the actual target group, yes, young adults or what we classify as youth are calling out, reaching for help. I think what's also really interesting is that the top 5 issues that people reach out to us are anxiety, financial problems, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. Those are the 5 key themes that we've picked up just over the last couple of months. Yes,
buyers
did I answer?
of the surface? Like which organizations have reached out to buy a helpline service from you that you wouldn't have
so we've had actually more small to medium enterprises that have reached out for their own companies, for their own employees, companies who have now, because of COVID, had to go through a retrenchment process. So they often get us to come in and help. But we've got medical aids that have reached out more so than usual. Some of the universities have reached out, but not all of them, and we're constantly engaging. Medical aids companies, so that kind of is our target group. As you mentioned earlier, Lance, as well, not government. So while they support our initiatives, but there's no specific project. So Dan, I'm so sorry. I just have to go off. I've got a quick interview. I did message Lance, but I'll be back now.
Jason, perhaps some of your thoughts. Are you seeing that there are companies now that are responding to the pandemic? I'm not sure that as very part of your research, but just in general, what are you seeing?
You know, I'm not aware of any particular venture, so I don't want to comment on what's happening in the commercial space. I can absolutely confirm that in the educational environment, there's a greater awareness of it and a greater willingness to do something about it. And hence, like Casey just said, engaging with people who can provide services. But I'm not sure how many people have put their money behind their intention.
Well, in fact, just to pick up on the conversation that we had with you some time ago, you were telling us that there were some attempts to put either a national service in for South Africa that all universities would be able to participate in, or university by university services, and they often landed up with sort of going up the university procurement path and then getting killed because no money, no ability to do procurements. Is that still the experience?
Yes, and I think there are a couple of barriers there. And one barrier is just a lack of knowledge about what's possible with technology. So you're selling an innovative new technology or a new approach to it that hasn't been thought about. So there's some education of administration that has to happen first. But the things that are going to be really effective require economies of scale that require working across campuses. And I think that's something that universities in education particularly haven't got their head around, the fact that these things only become viable if campuses are collaborating with one another. It doesn't help for each university to try and replicate its own system. So, and that's going to take some work or negotiation. So there have been attempts to try and sell universities access to a platform that would give their students, online support, useful psychoeducational information that's been vetted, access to emergency calls. And the conversations that I've been in on those, the administration has been very open to them until they see the price, and then the conversation gets closed down. Dan, have I
Yes,
spoken about the things you wanted to? Was there something else particular you wanted to?
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Lance?
I mean, that is exactly what the experience has been with the universities. But I also want to just pick up on the point that Jason is making. I think a point case solution, similar to what Cassie's experience has been with individual universities, might not have the same leverage as opposed to rather or targeting the horizontal population group. So not necessarily individual universities, but rather the segment of students. And therein lies the brand value, but also the traction of multiple numbers that one can get across, the student population group. I think, Jason, in your recent research, you interviewed just over 1 million students, and that was across 26 universities. So instead of segmenting that 1 million student population group to the vertical of universities, our ambition is to rather through the corporates target the 1 million student population group with ranges of severity of mental health care support required in that.
Great.
Absolutely, that makes complete sense.
Anybody, some last thoughts? Tony and then Osama? And then we'll start wrapping up. We don't want to go over time.
Dan, can I maybe just, since we have our international guest Osama here all the way from the UAE, I think one of the conversations that we would like to further between Osama and especially Willie, your work that you're doing in Europe and especially North Africa, there was an interest expressed to explore mental health support to the migrant folks that have gone to Europe from North Africa and the Middle East, and collaborative ventures potentially between what Osama's department is doing in their part of the world with your customer base in North Africa. So that just as a sidebar, but also by way of illustration to this audience, that what we are busy with here in South Africa is replicatable, and those conversations are underway, and is certainly something that we appreciate of both Osama and his team participating in our conversation, but that we also want to extend that to other population groups across the globe that could benefit from this initiative.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lance, very much. Maybe one suggestion, maybe we can try to find one of the leading universities in Dubai or UAE to be part of this POC. And I think this would be a good idea. I think even from the business point of view, they should be interested.
Great. And in fact, Jason, you've been part of the Harvard National Surveys, so multi-country collaboratives certainly are effective and a way to go.
Yeah, and we have collaborators in the UAE who are planning a student survey as we speak.
Great. So perhaps we can bring you in on a call with Osama and his group in the near future. So we have 6 minutes left. I just want to try wrap up, if, Lance, unless you have any other thoughts or comments.
No, thank you, Dan. This has been very valuable insights for us, and certainly we'll take these learnings and incorporate that in our next phase of this initiative.
And let me also reiterate that these creative collisions where different people with different perspectives come together and comment on a venture that is happening, they always land up providing this amazing richness in different ideas and different people riffing off different ideas. I think what I took away from today is, number one, The use cases are settling into its young adults with different sub-use cases. What's more important is there's evidence that the corporate sector will pay for a service for a number of different reasons, either because they see a new market, because of the brand building capabilities, because they support a particular group like education and healthcare, or education, or other reasons. But really, our takeaway is get a sufficiently good, but we need to go and test those assumptions. Is the takeaway? We need to get out of the shop with a good enough presentation to say, here's what we're thinking about, and would you actually do this, and have those discussions. I think what I also took away is we need to deal with a set of key principles. We have to articulate those principles, like this is going to be a secure service. It's and I think the last thing that I took away from this discussion is that there is a real need. But what we need to find, but the need is not necessarily well understood at the executive and board levels that would need to be able to approve the kinds of investments that we'll be looking for. So there is an educational component of this for senior executives that needs to happen in order to sell successfully. So our plan over the next probably 6 weeks is we have technology providers. We're not concerned that we can't produce the technology. We'll probably do a very small minimum viable prototype, but it'll look like a demo version of, so we can actually show people what it is that we are talking about, and that it actually exists, that we can speak to any of the technology questions that we might need to, but that our focus really is on the business model, and we should be putting that business model in front of a set of potential clients and coming back with evidence that we can find an anchor customer. And that will position us then to go to the other sources of impact funding with a model to say, here's what the service looks like, there's a need for it, here is the anchor customer who will, and this is the kind of investment that we will need, and we have a way that we can demonstrate that you will receive a return on investment. So that really is, Lance, our marching orders for the, come up with the very short deck, take it out, test it, come back with evidence, put it in front of investors, see if we can get the project funded. Any
George had a very apt description. Get out of the room. What did you?
That's right. Well, I guess metaphorically, get out of the building, right?
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
On Zoom.
Okay. Well, I guess you get out of Zoom and get back into Zoom with different people.
So again, as we wrap up, I just want to thank everybody very much. It's been so important to us to not only have your incredibly valuable advice and mentorship, but also your enthusiasm and your emotional support. These journeys are always hard. They have their ups and downs. People come on, people fall off, and it's because of the groups like this that we keep on going. And so, you know what, we despite the barriers, we know that we can succeed because all of us feel that this is an incredibly important thing to do, where we can impact the well-being and resilience of people through their lifetimes. So thank you very much, everybody. Let me pass it back to Lance for a final goodbye and thank you.
Yes, and Cassie, just on time. I hope your interview went well. This is a voluntary association as we build this collaborative, and for your time, we are very appreciative of that, and thank you for your continued support and interest. And let's forge ahead. Hopefully by the next event, we will have refined our message and brought the first anchor tenant on board to have a co-conversation with you. Thank you very much.